It's Tuesday on Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Hope you guys are having a great day out there. Great show for you coming up. Chris Hine from the Star Tribune will be my guest in just a few minutes, talking Timberwolves home stretch of their season. Just 4 games left, starting tonight in Milwaukee, a big one at that. They're all big at this point as they're battling for playoff positioning in the Western Conference. Probably even a bigger one in a couple nights against Memphis, and then 2 home games against Brooklyn and Utah to finish things off. The West is just jam-packed, as Chris and I will talk about. We'll get into what's been going well, why they're concerned even though they've won a bunch of games in a row, and what we might expect from these final 4 games, and maybe even the postseason and what kind of rotations they might be using in the postseason. Bunch of college basketball stuff coming up toward the end of the show. National title game in the men's Final Four last night. Florida prevailing. Not a beautiful game, but a competitive game, a fun game down the stretch. Florida prevails with a great defensive possession in the final, in Houston's final attempt. Didn't even get off a shot as Florida wins 65-63. Some interesting Gophers men's basketball recruiting news, a women's basketball thought as well towards the end of the show. First, though, what I miss. Got to start with the Twins. The news is ugly. I think my favorite sports movie of all time is still Bull Durham, the baseball movie from the 80s. Tim Robbins, Kevin Costner. Tim Robbins is the hot shot trying to make it to the majors. Kevin Costner, the veteran catcher, trying to kind of tame him, bring him along slowly, help him kind of harness his natural ability. And then, of course, there's the tension of the love story with Susan Sarandon. Just a great movie, a great baseball movie. And there's a scene, pretty early in the Durham Bulls season where their manager is just absolutely livid with them. They're playing terribly. They're 8-16, and he storms into the clubhouse and he says to them, "Baseball is a simple game. You throw the ball, you hit the ball, you catch the ball." And that's pretty much it for the Twins right now. They're not good at any of those things right now. They're 3-7, and the eye test and the stats tell you that they're not good at any of those things right now. Throwing the ball, I wrote about this yesterday on StarTribune.com. Starting pitchers right now for the Twins have the worst collective ERA in the majors. Almost 7 runs. An ERA of almost 7 per 9 innings. That's not getting it done. They've also thrown the fewest innings per game of any starting staff. Now, Simeon Woods-Richardson took the ball last night. Actually pitched relatively deep for a Twin starting pitcher this season. Pitched 5 2/3 innings. Woo! Get out the cake. Get a sheet cake for going into the 6th inning. He was only the second pitcher to throw a pitch in the 6th inning of a game out of 10 starts this season. 2 out of 10 times a Twins pitcher has thrown a pitch in at least the 6th inning of a game. Unfortunately, one of his last pitches was tattooed out of the park for a 4-1 lead, so he ended up giving up 4 runs. Next batter up, he gets to a 3-2 count. There's a malfunction with the communication on how he's getting the signs. Steps off. By the time he steps back on, it's too late, or at least it's deemed too late. He is called for a pitch clock violation. Batter walks to first base. Rocco Baldelli goes berserk, runs out onto the field, tries to get an explanation, doesn't like the explanation he got, gets ejected. He's probably just frustrated, too. He's frustrated with the moment, frustrated that call did not go the way they thought it should. It's a pivotal pitch. It's 4-1 still in the game. That could have been a big moment, but it determines whether the guy is going to get on base or not. It's not like the first pitch of an at-bat where you might be willing to say, okay, that was unfortunate, but you can still battle back. It's going to have an influence, but not an outsized influence like just giving a guy a free base. He didn't end up scoring, but the Royals did win 4-2. Rocco's got to be just frustrated because the starting pitching has been terrible this season. Again, only 10 games. I get it. He gets it, I think, too. He knows this is not what they are capable of, but he's also not shying away from how poorly they're playing. He said, we've got to come together. Yes, it's early, but we need to play better. They certainly need to pitch better in the starting rotation because 7 runs per 9 innings and 4.5 innings per start not getting it done. Simeon Woods Richardson contributed to that. 5 2/3, 4 runs allowed. That is not a quality start. He was basically one batter away from a quality start. If he doesn't give up that home run, gets an out with that number 9 hitter instead, it is quote-unquote a quality start. Maybe we're thinking about it a little bit differently, but 5 2/3, 4 runs, not getting it done. None of the starters have been getting it done consistently right now. The hitting has been just about as bad. They are hitting 199 as a team, 199 below the Mendoza line. Collectively, that's 28th in the major. Only 2 teams worse than them right now hitting the ball, and that's the Braves and the Rangers. Twins have only hit 6 home runs in 10 games this season. Yes, it's been cold most of where they're playing. Nobody's getting comfortable, things like that. But 6 home runs, that is not enough. 6 home runs, that is not getting it done for the Twins. Only one team has fewer home runs. They have 5. That team being the Tampa Bay Rays. So Tampa Bay Rays and Toronto Blue Jays only have 5 home runs. Those guys have much higher batting averages, though, doing better in that category. So the Twins not getting it done at the plate, not scoring enough consistently. They've had a couple outbursts, but they just don't add on. They don't consistently score runs. Half their games this season, they've been held to 2 or fewer runs, and they have lost all 5 of those games. So not enough offensive consistency. They've definitely put some bigger innings together, which is good to see. Maybe gives them hope. They think they're close. Carlos Correa been in an awful slump to start the year. That's a big part of the problem. Royce Lewis injured. That we get why things haven't been going great, but they have to get better because, yes, simple game. Throw the ball, hit the ball. Final piece of that, catch the ball. Byron Buxton misplays a fly ball in the first inning. Harrison Bader misplays a fly ball in the first inning. That leads to a run for the Royals. They go on the board right away. The infield defense for the Twins this season has been suspect. Willie Castro with a bunch of misplays the other day in the inning that kind of got the Astros back in the game. Sorry, that was Sunday. Bunch of misplays, miscues that got the Astros back in that game. The one they rallied to win. They were down big. Ended up winning that game, stopped the Twins' momentum. Now the Twins are 3-7. 3-7. You think, okay, what can get better? Well, the outfield defense should be a strength. I think that was a little bit of a one-off yesterday that you had the Buxton misplay and the Bader misplay. Both of those guys are Gold Glove caliber outfielders. Bader, a little bit out of position playing in the corners. He's used to playing center field, so maybe some of that's getting used to how the ball's coming off the bat. But both of those guys should be fine. I'm not so worried about outfield defense. I am still worried about infield defense. I am still worried about the lineup, although I think it will get better. They just need more consistency. They probably need to go somewhere where it's not 50 degrees or colder at first pitch to feel a little bit better about themselves. That would be nice. But the offense is going to struggle this season. I just don't think they have enough quality hitters in that lineup to feel good about that top to bottom. Starting pitching, I think you can think will get better, but until proven otherwise, they are not doing any of the 3 fundamental things that require you to win baseball games. That's why they're 3-7. That's why this season has gotten off to a really poor start. Let's bring in Star Tribune Timberwolves writer Chris Hine for today's show. Home stretch of the regular season. Chris, just 4 games left starting Tuesday night in Milwaukee. Then you've got at Memphis, which turns out to be a huge game, and then the 2 home games against Brooklyn and Utah to finish the season. Kind of feels like 3-1 is the number to hit if you want to give yourself a pretty good chance of avoiding the play-in. 4-0 certainly would do the trick. 2-2 probably puts yourself in a spot where you need a lot of help. Is that about where you see it?
Yeah, that's about where I see it. The only thing that guarantees it is 4-0 because you will have beaten Memphis and you will have jumped them in that scenario. And then some of the other teams play each other, like Golden State plays the Clippers on the last day of the season. I think Denver also plays Memphis. So the only guarantee here is if the Wolves win out. And if they do win out, it'll be 9 wins in a row to close the season, which will be the longest win streak they've had in maybe franchise history. I'm not certain of that.
They had a long one. Yeah, they've had long ones. I can't remember how long.
The 8-game one they had this year, I think, tied the one from 2004 or something like that. So yeah, a 9-game win streak is a doable and almost almost have to do it. I think 3-1, you're putting yourself at the mercy of the tiebreakers, I think, at that point. And depending on what combo of teams you end up tied with, that could go either way for them. It's really just hard to predict how that's going to end up just based on who's going to be in that scenario. So a lot to figure out, but the best thing that they can do is just win out. That's honestly it. Just win out.
Well, and the wild thing is, if they win out, which, like you said, is possible, but I wouldn't, we don't bank on it. Their next 2 games are tough, and then they still have to play, still have to finish this off against 2, lesser, some semi-tanking teams at home. But it would give them a 50-win season, Chris, if they pulled that off. If they got to 50 wins from where they were earlier in this year, that would be a pretty big accomplishment.
It would. We, back in November and December, I think if you had told fans that, hey, this team's going to end up with 50 wins by the end of the season, they might have looked at you a little crooked, but but I think they would have taken it. And I think it's always about the process and how it feels along the way, right? And it has felt like they should probably already be at 50 wins at various times because of all the teams that they've lost to that they should have beaten. But at the same time, they've also gone undefeated against Denver. They've had a couple of wins against Oklahoma City when they were undermanned. This team is an enigma, continues to be an enigma, and coming off of that Denver game, it looked like the Wolves still haven't fully recovered from that game, especially in Thursday's game against Brooklyn. I thought you could really tell they were feeling the effects of it. And then I think it just carried over on Saturday against Philadelphia, a game that Quentin Grimes almost doomed their playoff chances there, almost stole it in the last minutes, if not for Ant kind of answering him at every punch. So we'll see what happens. They had an off day here in Philadelphia on Sunday. They stayed in Philadelphia overnight Saturday, stayed in Philadelphia Sunday. They're practicing in Philadelphia this afternoon and then flying to Milwaukee. Yeah. This is in the beat, you always, you're aware of the team's travel schedule. I've never really seen them do this with 2 days off between a game. Usually they do it in like Los Angeles or something like that before going to Utah or something like that. But this was, I was surprised when they told me the itinerary was staying in Philly for this whole stretch and then flying to Milwaukee, this afternoon. So, but I think it'll be a much needed practice for them. You don't get a lot of practice time, especially this time of year. This is essentially going to be their final practice before the postseason. They're not going to have any practice time between Milwaukee and Memphis. Then Brooklyn's a back-to-back against, coming off of that Memphis game, and then Utah on Sunday after that. So I don't think they're going to practice any of those days in between. So this is going to be their last practice of the season, essentially, before the.
Well, so the practice is important. Having 2 days between those games probably could not have come at a better time because they're still winning, but gasping a little bit to do it, like you said. The Philadelphia game got way too close for comfort. They did win, though. It sounds like they're not exactly happy with how they're winning, but they also understand that at this point in the year, style points matter way less than results. That said, they got to play better to win these next 2 games because those teams have tons to play for as well.
They do, and I think coming off of that Philly game, they're very aware of that. I wrote, in my game story that essentially it sounded much like a loss usually does in terms of the post-game comments and what people were saying afterwards. Yeah, they were happy they got a win, and it's a win is a win, like you said, at this point in the season. But the way that they played that game, they were not happy with. They recognized that some of these old habits of letting mistakes on the offensive end or missed shots spill over onto the defensive end of the floor was creeping back up. You had a couple guys who had some tough nights, like Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels. Naz shot okay, 4 for 10, but he missed all of his threes. I think he had 5 turnovers, and then Jaden didn't hit a field goal in that game.
Right.
So it's just trying to get those guys back on track. And yeah, that's, they were such a key for the Wolves when guys were hurt. Nas coming into the starting lineup, Jaden having to take on more of the scoring responsibilities. And, now that everybody's back in this last stretch here, it's trying to refine their roles and carve out their space in the offense. And, Nas moves back to the bench. And so it's about, this team is still in some ways trying to figure it all out with the fit for everybody. And so I think, it's a good 2 days to maybe get those guys refocused as well.
Jaden was in double figures scoring, I think 30 out of 31 games, between, I want to say, like the midpoint in the season. I think it started like the, mid-January, January 15th game, all the way through that disappointing overtime loss to Indiana on the 17th of March. Like two full months, he was a consistent double-digit scorer. A lot of that with guys missing, Randall, DiVincenzo, Gobert. Since then, you're right, he's been a lot less consistent. I think, 8 games since that time I just mentioned, 5 of them not in double figures, a couple of 2-point games, a 5-point game, sometimes just not really looking for his shot. How does he stay involved when everybody is in the mix?
That's what we were wondering this whole time is just what happens to Jaden, because he had really played so well as guys were hurt and they needed him to step up. He had a couple games where without his offensive production, they don't win.
Yes.
Back in like February. And it's always been tricky with him on the offensive end of the floor. He relies on the ball movement to get him points. He doesn't get a lot of stuff called for him in the offense. But the one thing that he was doing that Rudy's kind of doing now at a very high level is crashing the offensive glass. That was one way that Jaden would find a lot of success getting his points. Was he was doing a good job crashing the offensive glass, getting close to 10 rebounds a night. And I think a little bit more of that is probably in order. Finch mentioned getting out in transition more. That was something I think the Wolves were doing a little better, even with this iteration of the team. At full strength, which isn't the fastest team, especially the starting lineup, right? But it's just maybe pushing the ball a little more, getting out in semi-transition and finding, kind of cracks in the defense that way where he can operate, get to his little mid-range game, try to get to the rim. But I just go back to, that starting lineup is such a, I don't know if they're back to where they were back in November or December in terms of production or slow starts or whatever it is, but the starting lineup has just been kind of up and down all season. Mm-hmm. And, I don't think Finch is going to go back to the lineup that he had where DiVincenzo was starting. Listen, the playoffs, all bets are off, but for the last 4 games here, I think, I don't think you're going to see any changes with the starting lineup, but they've been starting slow of late, and I don't know how much of that is Jaden. I don't know how much of that is just the chemistry with the unit, the lack of perceived shooting that's on the floor during those lineups, and that may be clogging things up. But when they get to their blended lineups and more mixing in the guys off the bench, they tend to be better. So I think just the starting lineup, the problems that we were seeing back in November, December, starting slow, not really generating, not hitting a lot of shots, not really generating a lot of good offense, especially at the start of games, is coming back right now.
Well, and it's not a surprise, or it's not, you don't have to look too far to figure out why. I mean, when they're playing that starting lineup, you have 3 offensive players who are kind of limited. Not that they can't score, but Conley, McDaniels, and Gobert are not necessarily score-first players at this point of their career, and they can be lightly guarded a little bit or discarded a little bit, and people can really focus on Ant. I feel like in those lineups, even Randall to a little bit of a degree too. So it's not a mystery why it's happening. So I wonder too, like once you get to the playoffs, like I almost feel like their best closing lineup sometimes might be Ant, Randall, and the 6, 7, 8. I don't know. It probably depends on the opponent, but you put Nas, Na and DiVincenzo in there, you give yourself a lot more opportunities. You sacrifice some defense, but you give yourself some more opportunities on offense.
Yeah, you've been seeing Nikhil work his way. I think Nikhil closed the game over Jaden on Saturday night, which gives you a little more outside shooting / playmaking, and you saw how effective obviously he was in that Denver win.
Oh yeah,
last week. And so and that's what I mean. Like, Finch hasn't been afraid to mix up the closing lineups, and just because you start the game doesn't necessarily mean you're finishing the game. So, and I really do wonder, and I've talked about this before, just in a playoff series, just how aggressive Finch is going to be at changing the lineups around, whether it's the starting lineup, whether it's minutes, distributing minutes differently, closing lineups, all this. He has shown in the playoffs more of a willingness to change it up than he does in the regular season. And you go back to his first playoff series when he benched D'Lo in Game 6 of Memphis for Jordan McLaughlin. He's not afraid and never has been to make the decisions he thinks necessary in a playoff series. So I do wonder, as they get to the finish line here, as he's looking over lineup combos and net ratings and all this, and then you prepare in depth for a first round opponent where you have maybe a couple practices and things like that to get ready. What he's going to be looking at, the combos he's going to want to lean on. I just have a gut feeling that it's going to be a little different in the playoffs than it is in the regular season, just based on he's not going to be held back in terms of status or contracts or whatever, whatever may factor into the decision in the regular season. I think that goes out the window in the playoffs. And, I would expect him to utilize the deep bench that he has in that way to try and maybe rearrange some things in rotations and minutes.
I think he really wants Mike Conley to be in the lineup. I do wonder at a certain point if he'll have to say, you know what, we can't give away minutes if Conley's not playing well in the playoffs. And if Jalen Clark in the playoffs kind of becomes that, 7, if you go into like a 7.5 man rotation, if he's the half and gets like 10 to 15 minutes of just giving the best opposing player on the perimeter trouble in that 10 to 15 minutes.
Could be. It all depends on the series. I think Mike does. I mean, generally speaking, I think Mike has played better.
Yes,
Mike has played better this time of the season than he was earlier in the season. He's healthier now.
Right.
As the season has gone on, they've been watching his minutes, watching his rest, all that stuff. So I'm not as concerned about Mike going into a playoff series. I'm more concerned about Jaden finding his offense. I'm more concerned about, Nas finding his consistency again, coming off the bench. Like that's kind of Julius, keep maintaining the right balance of trying to score versus distribute and, flirting with the triple double every night that like he was for a while there. Rudy, who's been lights out the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, he's been great.
But Rudy just maintaining that, through the playoff series and whatever the matchup may be, just maintaining that level. There's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of possibilities where this team could, reach its ceiling, but it always seems like they have to things just have to line up right, there were times where guys were clicking into place, their roles were good, everything was fine, but they just sometimes it just falls out of whack. And right now it feels like things are more out of whack than they are in focus.
Let's talk quick about the Western Conference race, because what's fascinating to me is, last time we talked 2 weeks ago, it felt like it was almost 3 teams for one spot, right? It was like the Wolves, the Clippers, and Golden State. Who was going to manage to get the 6? And I was like, hey, is Memphis in play? You were like, I don't think Memphis is in play. We didn't know they were going to go in the tank. I didn't think Denver would get into play, but Denver is certainly in play. There's 5 teams right now, Chris, that have 32 losses, and 4 of them have 46 wins. Denver has 47 wins. So there's basically like 5 teams that are essentially tied in this race. So it's like 5 teams for 3 spots, and it's not like the Lakers have their spot sewn up, although you would imagine even with their difficult schedule that they'll find a way to get a couple wins and stay out of the play-in. But there's more teams that have you've opened up more spots, but in the process, I don't feel like their potential first-round matchup has got more favorable, because I feel like when they were angling for that 6 seed and it looked like Denver was going to be the 3, I kind of liked that matchup. Now I look at it and say, man, they might wind up with the Lakers or Golden State, even if they avoid the play-in.
Yeah, this is a very unique thing. We did not see this coming over the last week. That Denver win to me was a huge, I think, pivot point and fork in the road for this stretch for the Wolves.
Yeah, both teams. Denver hasn't won since then, have they?
I know they have not. No, they've dropped. They beat Golden State, didn't they? Did they beat Golden State?
Is that right? Okay, I can't remember. They've been
there's a lot that's been going on.
They've been bad in the last few weeks, yeah.
But they lost to San Antonio right after the Wolves game, and then they lost last night to Indiana. And yeah, to me that was I went into that game thinking, okay, if the Wolves beat Denver tonight, I think they're going to get the 6th seed. If they lose, I think they're going to get the 7 or 8. And now I have no feel.
Well, now I have no feel for it. How can you? Yeah. They can wind up anywhere from 4th. They can wind up anywhere from 4th to 8th at this point.
In terms of a potential opponent, I just unfortunately, by being in this position, you've lost the luxury of playing that game of trying to match up with who you want to match up with. You just have to get in the playoffs and let the chips fall where they may after that. Whether you're the 4-5 and that means you're 4-5 and that means Oklahoma City is on your side of the bracket, whether it means you're 6 and you have to play the Lakers in the first round.
Yeah.
The ideal matchup kind of is being, if you can be the 7 and win the play-in,
right,
and then play Houston in round 1. Like that is the path that if you want to roll the dice a little bit in the play-in tournament, that could be end up being the easier matchup, especially if Denver keeps falling and Denver ends up as like the 4 or the 5. Mm-hmm. Who knows? But yeah, right now you can't play that game. You just got to get in. You just got to get in.
Well, and it's ironic because you're right. I think you want to stay out of the play-in because it's dicey. You might not even make it to the playoffs because even as the 7 or 8 in that scenario, you're going to be playing like a 48-win team in the first play-in game, whoever else misses. And then if you lose that one, you're one hot night from Sacramento or Dallas away from not even making the playoffs. So you're right. You can't play that game, but it's kind of ironic that as more teams have drifted into the catchable mode, I almost feel like the matchup possibilities have gotten worse.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong there, especially if the Lakers are going to end up solidifying themselves in the 3 seed. It makes that 6 seed much more less desirable, I guess. Yeah. And you almost want to get to the 4 or the 5, but you might end up playing Golden State in that scenario. You might,
I know.
You get Denver in that scenario, but you get Golden State.
That's gonna be wild. Denver, by the way, has not won since they lost to Golden State. They lost to San Antonio.
They lost to Golden State. Okay, yeah.
And then they've got the Kings on Wednesday, Memphis still, and then they finish at Houston. Now that at Houston at the end.
Houston could be resting guys.
Yeah, that could be less favorable than you think, kind of depending on who's locked in at that point and whatnot. Although Houston's, I don't know if they've locked into the 2 yet, but they got to be pretty close. So
yeah, they're pretty much locked into it. Yeah,
a lot to sort out, Chris. I mean, if they go 4-0, I don't think they're just in. I think they're going to get the 4 or the 5 if they're 4-0. If they're 3-1, I think they have a pretty good chance of being the 6 and avoiding the play-in. But again, this West is brutal this year. We say this like almost every year, but I feel like it's even more so this year with how tightly bunched this has become.
Yeah, it's and you look at the East, and it's like, really, these are the records that it requires to get in or be a play-in team. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Like the East at least has 6 decent teams. Like their playoff teams at the very beginning are going to be fine, but there's going to be the 7 and 8 those are going to be bad teams at a certain point. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, we'll sort it all out. I'm sure we'll talk again next week once this is all settled. Regular season finale on Sunday. 3 games before that game. We'll learn more. We'll find it out. We'll find out. A lot of it will come down to how they play, and probably it's going to come down to 2 or 3 plays at the end of a couple of these games coming up to determine where they ultimately sort themselves out.
Well, we'll see. We'll see if that's a good thing for this team, considering
I don't know.
Considering their late game issues.
Well, I mean, that's true. Like they're 0-2 against Memphis this season, and both games were 2-point losses in which Ant missed a 3 at the buzzer. So it's been close against Memphis. It's been close against so many of these teams. I wouldn't expect it to be anything different for the rest of these games.
Yeah, absolutely. It's gonna be fun, and we'll be there for all of it.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Right. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you, Mike.
Great stuff from Chris. One thing I found interesting, I look at the basketball reference playoff probabilities page way too much. In fact, when I look at it on my phone, it gives me that little thing that says you visit this page often as I pull it up. It's like, yeah, I don't need to be reminded of how often I look at certain pages. I look at my kids' like school lunch menu page all the time. It says you visit this page often. Like, you don't need to tell me that I visit this page often. I know I visit this page often, okay? But I do look at this page a lot, and I find this interesting right now. The most likely seed for the Timberwolves, according to their probabilities right now, is number 4. And the next most likely seed is number 5. Combine both of those, more than a 50% chance, according to Basketball Reference in this moment, that the Wolves will be either the 4 or the 5. The 4 is around 28%, the 5 around 25%, so 53% or so, but they'll be a 4 or a 5. That gets you into the territory where, hey, you could have home court advantage in the first round. You could avoid some matchups, although being in the 4-5 means you're going to get Oklahoma City in the second round, even if you make it past a tough opponent in the first round, which might be Golden State, which might be, anybody you could play is going to be hard, but it might get you a tougher matchup. It could get you home court. I just find that interesting. Like this is constantly changing. This is not like this is how it's going to be. This is a snapshot more than it is like an eternal prediction. These things change as teams win and lose. It'll change based on how the Wolves do against the Bucks tonight. It'll go up. It'll improve if they win. It'll go down if they lose. That's how tight the margins are in the West with all those teams with 32 losses and everybody jockeying for position really 3 through 8. We'll still have an outside chance at the 3, although that would require the Lakers to really take a nosedive. But the Wolves certainly in the mix for avoiding the play-in. They're up like 76% to avoid the play-in. 96% overall just to make the playoffs 1 through 8 once all is said and done. So they are in a good spot. They've gotten themselves into a much better spot than we might have thought earlier in the season. Now it's a matter of can they finish it off. Let's finish with the cooler 3 college basketball items. First, national title game last night. Watched like the last 5 minutes. I was doing other stuff, watching the Twins game, but turned it on to watch the last final minutes when I saw that it was a tight game. Florida prevails 65-63. A lot of people complaining about Houston's offense down the stretch. A lot of it was great. I thought it was just a lot of great Florida defense. I thought Houston could have executed better. You felt bad for Kelvin Sampson watching that last tortured possession, but Florida was defending like crazy, getting in their face, and then altering that last shot attempt to force basically what would have been a travel, but ended up just being the ball bouncing around as the game ended. Like, I thought it was better defense than it was poor offense in that scenario. Florida absolutely earned it at the end, so congrats to Florida in that game. A pretty good national title game, even if the offense was lacking in certain moments. Gophers men's basketball team also here in the cooler, getting a transfer from Davidson. Not Steph Curry, not Steph Curry's cousin, anything like that, but Bobby Durkin, 6'7", scored a double figures 23 times last season, started for Davidson last season. That's a pretty good get for them. I think he's going to be a good fit for them, adding, he had 13.5 points, 5.9 rebounds, 2.4 assists last year, shot almost 36% from 3. Good free throw shooter. That should be a good get for the Gophers, adding to their roster a guy who certainly can play, figures to play big minutes for them next season. So that is a good get for Niko Medved's program as they try to round out their year one roster, kind of building for both the present and the future. A competitive rebuild. Let's call this a competitive rebuild for the Gophers, Niko Medved's team. They want to be competitive right away, but they also want to have an eye on the long term. Also want to mention Jim Suhan wrote a really good column today on Caitlin Clark and Paige Beckers. Worth your time. Go check that out at StarTribune.com as well. There'll be more basketball talk on tomorrow's show, thinking about, Wolves results, but more hockey on tomorrow's show. Sarah McClellan joins me to talk about the Wild, another team battling for playoff position. Got a huge, much-needed win over the weekend against Dallas to get themselves in better shape. That thing's not locked up, though, so Sarah and I will talk about everything down the stretch, talk about injured players. Kaprizov, is he on the verge of returning, things like that. So that will be on tomorrow's show, a little Wild and NHL talk. Until then, I am Michael Rand. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow.